Hey, welcome to Tom and James. It is Friday. Actually, we had to record this early because we have some things to talk about, and James has got a lot going on. Hey, James, we almost caught you eating just a second ago, but did you see Don
I'm
Stewart?
looking for aliens.
Did you? We did talk about that. For anybody who watched the live on Tuesday. Hey, did you see the Don Stewart when he did Sunday Night for me recently, and his cat's got in a fight behind the camera?
No, I mean,
everybody can see the cat fight.
Are you kidding me?
He's got
Don Stewart is the cat man. You know that, right?
Yeah, he is. I'm going to tell you right now how many views he has had on his cat fight. Let me see. What's my name? Got to find it here. I wasn't planning on doing this, but since we almost caught you on camera doing some things, why not? Let's see. Don Stewart, 46,000 views on his cat fight.
Dude, is that all you did? You released a thing that says Don Stewart's cat fight?
No, hey, Gabe, that's what we should have done the thumbnail, Don Stewart's cat fight. We should change it.
You should make a small little video and do it. Give it, you know what, Gabe?
You know what?
Gabe, let's do it.
Right.
Give it to me. Give it to me, and I'll put it up on my YouTube.
Okay, are you going to tell Don? Because Don might get mad at me. You tell him first. Okay, in that case, let's just do it. We're going to put it on both. It'll go viral. Let's do this, Gabe. Pull it out. And we'll do a little section there and Don Stewart cat fight. This is like gold. This is the best news I've heard. Okay, you ready? We've been promising people we were going to talk about the 10 kings because both Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 17 tell us, James, that there are 10 kings who are going to be leading this global government of the last days. And Antichrist is going to sit at the top. 3 of the kings are going to be subdued. We know that according to Daniel chapter 7. Okay, we both agree on that. We both can see the global government. The problem is we don't necessarily agree on where the 10 kings come out of. I say it is global. The world's going to be divided into 10 regions. You say it's going to be Europe. So change my mind. Who does that? Will Witt change my mind?
So I'm going to throw a question out at you, and it's a legit question, okay? Because in my opinion, and this is not like a compliment sandwich, I'm just saying this is reality. I really feel this way. You are one of the most forward thinkers that I know in Bible prophecy for a lot of reasons, not just one. There's a lot of reasons why I feel like you are this way, okay? So being as forward as you are with this, I am sincerely and genuinely interested in knowing how you make this a global conglomerate as opposed to what is in the region that the Bible has been talking about from day one.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'm really curious to know that because that's the thing that intrigues me. And you could potentially win me over if you give me a viable explanation just on that point alone.
Okay. So I look at it, I used to believe that it was Europe, the 10 kings rising out of Europe. I believed that for the longest time. And I kept looking at it and I go, wait a minute, this last days empire, it is global. I believe Antichrist rises out of Europe, but I believe that Europe is just one of the global regions. When I read Daniel chapter 7.
But why? That's my question.
I don't see why it would be Europe when I look at it.
I can make some pretty reasonable arguments for why it would be Europe.
Okay.
But going back, I'm really curious to know why. And now, serious, we're not messing around. No. Why is it that you turn it into something that is global? This is what I'm.
It's a global government. So
I know it's a global government. Yeah. But why would you say that the conglomeration of nations here is we're talking about a global conglomeration? And then if it is, how do you determine what they're going to be?
When I read Daniel 7 and Revelation chapter 17, I can't see it any other way. It's like I said, years ago when I was doing Bible prophecies, it was about the same time when I came to the conclusion that the Chinese army, the 200 million are not a Chinese army. I started looking at it going, wait a minute, I don't think this has been the correct interpretation of that. And so of Revelation chapter 9, Revelation chapter 16.
Yeah, but let me interrupt you for can I interrupt you for just 1 second, Tom? Okay, you're conflating the two. The Revelation issue with respect to the China thing is an easy one. That doesn't even
okay.
If you have basic reading skills, and understanding skills, you would know that there's nothing metaphorical being discussed there. It's literal. We're talking about some kind of creatures that we probably haven't seen. Revelation, this 200 million man army nonsense is something that just gets basically made up by people who are trying to explain it. It's not biblical. You know it, I know it. It's really, really easy, right? Like it's literally right there in the text, right? So I don't understand how that gets your conclusion for people getting that wrong. It has nothing to do with the global thing.
No,
it's just plain. It's plain and simple. It's in the text, right?
And there's a lot of traditional prophecy has been taught. I'll say it this way: traditional in the sense of people who hold the view that you and I do, pre-tribulation rapture, and for some reason within that circle, which has been around for quite some time now, there's been things that have been traditionally taught. And I think that the 10 kings coming out of Europe is one of those, because I now when I read Daniel chapter 7, I don't see it out of Europe. I see it as being a global empire. Let me read to you what Andy Woods says about this. And I didn't know this about Andy Woods until just a few weeks ago, by the way. But he says this regarding the 10 kings of Daniel chapter 7. He says, one of the things to understand about Daniel's writings is he uses king and kingdom synonymously. It's like when we say the White House, we're not just talking about a house, but we're talking about the governing structure of the executive branch of the government. Daniel does the same thing. He did the same thing back in Daniel 2 related to Nebuchadnezzar. When he saw the feet mixed with iron and clay, he said, you, O king, Nebuchadnezzar, are the king of kings to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom. And then Woods writes this, see how he just switched there from king to kingdom. What exactly is Daniel seeing in this vision? He's not just seeing 10 kings, he's seeing the 10 kingdoms that these kings represent. And then he goes on to make a case for it being 10 global kingdoms, which is the same way I see it. And I came to this conclusion probably about 10 years ago. And I
but he's
realized,
helping to make my case.
Okay. What? I don't see it, but I can't see it any other way. He writes this. This is Andy Woods. One of the things I found very interesting a few years back, he goes into the Club of Rome, being with 10 kingdoms. But then he says this with which they already invented a world with 10 kingdoms. Daniel is seeing some kind of 10 king confederacy, not just arising out of Europe. I think this is the mistake people make when they look at Europe and they say it's going to be the European Common Market, the European Economic Community, and so forth. I don't have any doubts that Europe doesn't play some kind of role in this, but it's bigger than Europe. It's talking about something that governs the structure of the entire world. And then he goes on to say how he sees that it's going to be broken down also. And it's the same way. When I look at what we now have, the USMCA, US, Mexico, Canada, this treaty. By the way, the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was part of the Paris Climate Agreement and all these other things, it didn't get completely eliminated by Trump. That got rolled over into the USMCA. But you see this, this is a region. And when we look at the wars against borders, and I remember you and I talking about borders some time ago, how these globalists want to take down the borders. Well, when you eliminate the borders, even between the United States and Mexico, you start realizing, okay, what's really going on here? Is this the attempt at building this 10-region confederacy?
But that, listen, I have great respect for the great Andy Woods. Believe me, I do. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the way you come to some of these conclusions. But this one, I think, is hugely erroneous. And the reason why it's hugely erroneous is because you're making the assumption that we're talking about 10 uniquely located kingdoms that come together for a global conglomerate. I think it's the exact opposite. Look, Andy helped to make my point when he talked about the whole White House thing, right? The discussion and what the Bible is pointing to with us is that we're going to have 10 kings in this region who, in essence, are going to have responsibility over control over the whole world. Right now, when you look at it, you are already watching that happen. You are already watching decisions being made for regions like North and South America based on the movement and the activity of things that are happening in Europe. That's already happening. This is why you have these, with these G10 summits, G20, all of these summits are taking place in Europe. They're centralized in Europe. Europe is viewed oftentimes as the neutral place where all of these things can be ruled from. So you're helping to make my point. The idea is when you talk about the White House is representative of a whole region, right? It's not just representative of the immediate location in which the White House is located. It's the same thing. Centralized rule over the government, over the world by this global government and this global economic driving is going to be centralized in Europe, but its expanse is going to be global. So that's the idea. Think of it like this. Think of it as the fact that we are more and more are not dependent upon physical location. That is something that's becoming a thing of the past. Physical location is becoming somewhat superfluous. The bigger issue is now regions being controlled by people centralized in a particular area or location. Why is it you think that Israel becomes the biggest and craziest thing right now that everybody is dealing with? Besides, you have to understand something. When we look at Bible prophecy, why is it that we generally accept the fact, or the Bible period, why is it that we generally accept the fact that when we talk about to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, we're accepting the fact that we're talking about Jerusalem? North, south, east, and west from Israel. This is something that the Bible has always made very clear. It's something that we expect. So now how is it that we are all of a sudden changing it to being something that's global, where things are spread apart when we deal with the centralized focus? If you say that the 10 regions, these 10 nations are going to be regions all over the world, how do you centralize that? And before you tell me, you centralize it by the stipulation of rule to the Antichrist, that's not going to be completely accurate, because the thing is these 10 nations already, in essence, have a general rulership or conglomeration of rulership over the rest of the world. They're centralized. It's very obvious that they're centralized. Not to mention the fact that Daniel is drawing from the existing infrastructures that happened that he had observed. So he's watching, and you can look at the language in Daniel. The language in Daniel tells us that we're talking about a revival of an empire that has yet never come into complete fruition. Well, the revival of that empire, if you looked at the governmental infrastructure of that empire, the governmental infrastructure of that empire was the same exact thing. You had regions that were ruled by governors that were all in that general area, and they ruled over areas all over the world that surrounded them, right? They ruled over portions of all throughout Africa, South Africa, North Africa, Asia Minor, all of these things. But the centralized locations of all of these governors were, in essence, there in Rome. And if we're talking about the resurrected or a revived Roman Empire, we're talking about an infrastructure that is set in place in that general region to rule over the global economy, right? To rule over the global world. And it would make a whole lot of sense to keep them centralized there, because that's what the Bible implies. I don't see any implication being given any other place. Listen, right down to the issue of the Antichrist, he's being given all of this power, right? He's being told to rule. He's a secular figure. I believe that. I believe he comes from Europe. I believe he is a non-Jew. This is why he needs the false prophet to create a picture of what it actually looks like for a religious person to embrace a non-religious person, right? But the thing that's very interesting, if you notice it, is everything this final Antichrist does is exactly what the Caesars did throughout the years. right? It was the Caesars that always viewed themselves to be God. They always had religious leaders in their pocket to help propagate that information. By the way, at one point, even including those that were a part of the temple infrastructure, it was a political relationship for convenience. They encouraged the worship of Caesar without actually encouraging the worship of Caesar, except with the minor issue that was represented by the temple in Jerusalem and the regions there. But that's exactly what they did. So the revived Roman Empire, you would expect whoever this final Antichrist is to be someone who will be widely popular, like some of the great Caesars were, and then eventually become not so popular when he absolutely demands to allow himself to be worshipped. By the way, I think it was Caligula. I don't remember which one. There were a couple of Caesars that actually demanded to be set up in the temple and be worshipped in the temple, and they stopped that from happening because of the obvious problems that would exist. As a matter of fact, I believe that's the very reason why Titus ordered that the temple not be touched, because I believe it was the intent of Caesar to set himself up during that time in that temple to be worshipped. And of course, you know the story with that. Historically speaking, we know that a torch got thrown right into the temple and things burned, and then the gold seeped through the stone, and they lifted, not one stone was left upon the other, and so on and so forth. It's very, very important, right? These are very important things. So I see that what we're looking at here is we're looking at a revival of the Roman Empire. Of course, it's going to be revived to a place that it's never been before, but the revival of the Roman Empire depends on the way that it actually existed back then. And that was, you had a conglomerate of nations that all stipulated and yielded its power on they did this at certain points, so that the centralized figure would be able to rule as he does. And I think that's why we're going to be looking at this in Europe. Look, we're already seeing it. Everything is focused on Europe, right? Even Brexit has actually helped for everything to be focused in the area of Europe, right? So all of these nations that we know are going to be inconsequential in the future with respect to what the Bible says concerning the end times even makes it easier for that centralization to take place. So if we had a series of nations that were going to be great and stay and be superpowers, which I don't think we will, then your argument, I think, makes sense, right? I think it would make sense. But the problem is you've got two major issues. You've got the fact that everything that's modeled about the future Roman Empire was modeled after the existing Roman Empire, right? Everything. There's no confusion about that, right? And then the other thing is, again, we don't ever talk about the idea of globalization of nations coming together based on a series of strengths coming together to become one. No, we see a globalization of all of the nations because they need something desperately that they can only get from the union of nations that exist in the most wealthy and powerful place, and that's Central Europe, right? Or that centralized area of Europe. So that's what I'm looking at. And by the way, the Bible seems to imply that, right? You have to make a lot more assumption to say, hey, let's go over to the global side of things and say we're talking about 10 regions there. It doesn't make sense. And then the other question that I would have is the three nations that capitulate themselves to the work of the Antichrist, how does that work out? And what region do they represent?
Okay, so you said a lot of things in there. You definitely didn't convince me, I'm just saying. So I believe...
It's okay, you're ignorant. I'll pray for you.
I believe my theory that's going to be global, the only way it will work is if there is no superpower, except that of Antichrist. Every superpower, hence, I believe, for this system to work, for both. Yeah, so I see it going that way. The United States isn't going to be the superpower. You and I have talked about China. It's not going to be that superpower. The only way I can see this working in the global sense, I absolutely believe it's going to be centralized in Europe with the power base, but I don't see the 10 kings ruling out of there. I believe there's going to be a king that's going to be appointed over each one of these 10 regions that are going to be global. I don't think there's any other possible way that you could bring about a global system that the Bible describes in the last days. Because what we may be talking about, because if it's just centralized to the revived Roman Empire and that landmass, well, how do you bring the rest of the globe into it? The way you bring the rest of the globe into it is you collapse things like the United States of America. New
colonization. That's how you do it.
You have Europe, you have the USMCA, you have the Asian community. You go to the Club of Rome, for example, and you look at the global map that they've already created, and you hear these globalists talk. That's what they're looking at. But I do believe, like you, it will be centralized in Europe. I believe Antichrist rises up out of Europe. But I believe each one of these regions is going to have somebody that's appointed as the power person in that entire region. There has to be somebody in charge of it, just like in ancient Rome. Rome had their power base was in Rome, Caesar's in Rome, but he still had to have somebody in each region even during that time. And the structure that is going to be there.
But me and you, I'm not having a difficult time with that concept. What I'm having a difficult time is how it's actually categorized, right? So for example, if you have a region that's being dealt with like North America, let's just say we have a North American region, or we have a North and South American region, right? We combine them, which I think it'll be like a North American region, a South American. Okay, let's just say we have that. The ruler of that region, I think, is going to be originally some part of a union in Europe. In other words,
it could be that it could be that they were somewhere out of Europe, but I don't see why they have to be. I mean, I look at.
Well, here's why.
It doesn't make sense to me that they have to be out of Europe. Just the Antichrist.
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it has to be something like that. Because if it's not, then you do have, in essence, what would be somewhat of a superpower. You do. You have a country that's functioning independent of a centralized government.
Okay, I can ask you a question. Okay, so let me ask you this. So let's take the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada. That's this agreement we're already in.
Right.
You don't think somebody like Barack Obama could lead that in this confederacy at the end, and he wouldn't be submissive to the Antichrist leading it at the top?
The only way he could do something like that is if he was disassociated with any rulership in the region. So in other words, Mexico, Canada would never let that happen if he did it as the primary or the principal of the United States of America.
He wouldn't do it.
The only way he would be able to do this, is if he was a leader that was anointed somehow in Europe as part of a global conglomerate of leaders leading out of Europe.
That's exactly what it is. So it doesn't mean that these 10 people have to be European. Antichrist, I do believe he is. But I look at it and go, well, to me that makes sense. I mean,
but it's European based. In other words, he would have to be coronated by Europe.
I would agree with that. I would totally agree with that.
And I think what would happen, let me just add to this. I think what would happen is one of the nations that's in Europe would in essence be tied to the leadership associated with that region. It would have to be that way.
Why is that?
The reason why it would have to be that way is because you have to be able to create some kind of there has to be some kind of connective tissue that takes you back to that region of Europe. There has to be. Because think about it. If it isn't that case, and we're talking about a guy who disassociates himself with America altogether and then becomes one of the regional global leaders, who's he tied to?
Yeah, no, I would agree. There's going to be somebody in charge. There's going to be an entity in charge. But, and I do believe it's
a group of people that are willing to co-opt together.
Right. So I could easily see a Barack Obama being the anointed one for the USMCA. For me, it's a no-brainer. So when I look at it, the way it's been taught in prophecy circles for 100 years, or less than 100 years, European Common Market, the European Union, it's this, it's that. I don't think that's what it is at all. But I do believe
so then maybe
it will be centralized in Europe, but I do believe it's going to be 10 global regions.
So then maybe we're just not. Maybe we are on the same page, but we're dealing with semantics here.
I look at the world into 10 global regions.
Yeah, I mean, look, the world is the world. It's not like, look, before if it's just all in Europe and there's nothing else outside of Europe, then the rest of the world would have to be destroyed. There would be nothing there, right? I'm not saying that that's I'm not saying that that's the case. What I'm saying is I'm saying that these leaders, whoever these leaders are are going to have to be a part of, for lack of a better term, let me just say it, like a cabal, for lack of a better term, who are centralized in Europe, anointed and coronated in Europe, and given the responsibility as a coalition, right, to be able to do this. Look, I've said this before. I said that the construction of the European Union, as the Bible defines it, not as what we're looking at right now, the construction of the European Union is going to be based on economic benefit. It's going to be based on economics. I'm convinced of that. Why? Because the Bible tends to revert to that, right? So in order to be able to maximize the economic benefit associated with such a union, you have to be able to create some kind of a series of agreements by which many of these independent nations yield their sovereignty to be a part of a bigger global union. Now, they might never say, well, I'm going to yield my sovereignty, right? But what will happen is these leaders, let's say you have a leader of Mexico, Canada, and the United States, will be people who will, in essence, be the puppet of whoever rules over that particular region. And that person will undoubtedly be based in Europe. And when I say based in Europe, they will be tied to Europe, potentially living in Europe, coming from that same philosophy and heart, trained up and raised in that way. And I don't want to go as far as to use the word colonization, but these regions that you're calling, that you're saying that exist, are very likely going to be kind of like a colony of each of these global headings. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be, but it still has to be centralized out of Europe. I think we're talking about the same thing, to be honest with you, Tom. I didn't quite understand what you're saying. Now I'm beginning to understand you. I think we're kind of talking about the same thing. I think where the fine disagreement may occur with me and how people traditionally teach this is I've never believed that we are talking about the dissolvation, so to speak, the end of every country around us except 10 nations in Europe, or a country becoming so inconsequential that it doesn't even really exist. I mean that these, even if we're talking about 10 global regions, they still have to become inconsequential. They still have to become inconsequential.
You read Daniel's.
They're the split of the soil, so to speak.
Yeah, they're
right. So think of it. You have a nation. Let's say you have 10 European nations. I'll just throw out this possibility, right? You have 10 European nations. All of them grow in strength. All of them have influence. All of them key people in the European move for globalism, because it really is coming out of Europe. The move for globalism is coming out of Europe. Okay, Soros, everybody, they're all coming out of Europe. Okay, everybody, yeah. Right. So we all say, okay, we come together. This is what we're doing. Here's a globalization plan. With the key people that are going to be the leaders, I don't even think are going to be traditional governmental leaders. I think they're going to be the businessmen that continue to rule using the woke industrial complex and every other tool that they use. They're going to be the new leaders of those regions. And they're all going to say, well, I have a vested interest in North and South America. I'll take that. You have a vested interest in Antarctica. You have a vested interest in South Africa. I'll take that. And they'll all take possession of these global positions, right? And we're still involving 10. You might say, hey, listen, the 10 nations that exist right now that are ruling, like, for example, Soros. Okay, well, I have a vested interest in Greece. I'm going to rule over that, and I'm going to take over control over that. But I also want North and South America because of my investments in there. Okay, fine. You'll be the person that North and South America has to go to kiss the ring to be able to get permission on what to do. Now, they'll have their own independent governments. You'll have, several Latino governments and so on and so forth, and you'll have the government of the United States of America. But all of them will be subservient to that person who rules from Europe.
Yeah. I don't think it's. I think we may be closer.
I'm throwing out a possibility.
We may be closer than we thought we're closer, I think, than we thought. I don't see it being these 10 rulers in Europe over each one of the 10 regions, though. But I do believe it's going to be centralized in Europe. And I'm going to throw, and this is something else.
How do you separate that? How do you not conflate the two? If they're going to be centralized in Europe, then how does that work?
No, well, you have to have everything has to be centralized somewhere. But when it speaks of specifically of the 10, I don't think it has to be a 10. It could be Antichrist and 3 other people, that are running this. They're running this thing out of Europe. But they will. I do believe these 10 will have to be anointed by Europe, and one of the reasons by the Antichrist.
That's my point.
And one of the reasons why they have to be is because Antichrist subdues 3 of them, because 3 of them are not going along with his plan.
Yeah. So I mean, that's my point. How do you not have an infrastructure by which the Antichrist can subdue them?
I don't see it's like 10. We're going to have 10 leaders in 10 different nations in Europe that are going to oversee 10 different regions globally.
But they all listen. They all look. Okay, let me reword this a different way. Right, every single nation that's out there right now, not all of them, but most of them are. Right, every single nation that's out there is being influenced in one way or another by a European subsidiary. Mm-hmm. That's true. There's no way you can deny that, right? Why? Because virtually every nation outside of Europe at one point or another was a colony of one of these European nations. They were colonized by one of these European nations. So forever, those nations will be tied to the existence of these European nations that colonized them in the first place, right? For example, the United States of America will always be primarily influenced by the things that we see in London and France. That's always going to be the case because both of those nations had predominantly their hand upon us. We came from those. We fought those people in order to be able to obtain what we have right now. And there's always going to be a formal tie to the hip. Right now, there's a massive movement by people in the United States of America and in Canada, for that matter, to be more like the Brits and the French. South America is predominantly influenced by Spain. There's no denying that. They're prominently influenced by Spain. I think that many of these nations, these regions that I'm talking about, are going to go back to the place that they were originally colonized by in order to create the associations necessary to create this conglomeration. And what I'm saying is I'm saying these nations that we're looking at right now that are in Europe, these nations are going to be the ones that are in essence going to have the rule or the influence of. So when we talk about the rest of the world has to become inconsequential. United States has to become inconsequential. Canada has to become inconsequential.
Which we would agree on. We totally agree on
all of them do. So if they become inconsequential, they cannot be independent entities ruled by independent leaders by which there is no European influence for. So the bottom line is there has to be a European influence that rules over them, very similar to the colonization, going back to the colonization thing. By the way, we're already watching this happening on a socioeconomic, even geopolitical shift. We're watching this happen, right? Here's a great example. We're going backwards. We're not going forwards. The movement right now represented by Black Lives Matter tells us, hey, listen, you've got to give the people who are native to this area their land back, and you've all got to withdraw, right? So there's a movement to go back to the place of inconsequential mechanisms within government to be able to allow this new revolution to take place. We're going back to segregation. We are going back to Jim Crow because of what they're doing with white people. They're wanting to separate white and black people, right? And what that's doing is that's leading to a massive breakdown in government where the government itself is walking further and further and further away from independence and freedom and running themselves back to Europe. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're watching it. We're watching Joe Biden give the United States of America back to Europe. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what's happening. So that would make sense. And that's why I say that there is going to be a European centralization, and the 10 rulers that we see that we have discussed here will have rulership over these regions who in essence gave themselves back into the mechanization of, or the mechanism of colonization to be able to create this kind of infrastructure that we're seeing created. That's where I see the Central European thing. That's where I actually see these rulers coming from Europe.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I think we would both agree that it's not what we've been hearing for years. It's the European Common Market. It's the European Union. It's these different organizations that have come out of Europe. There's still something forming.
No, I agree with you, but I always refer, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, Tom, I'm really sorry, but I always refer to the European Common Market because I think that that's a starting place, or the European Union. I think that's the starting place of the formation that we're talking about that's necessary to be able to create this global infrastructure that we're talking about. That's why I make reference to it. Oftentimes people will conflate that with what has been traditionally taught over the last 50 years, but that's not technically my view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Interesting. It was good talking with you today.
Well, come on, bro. Have I changed your mind?
No, you haven't changed my mind, but I like talking to you because you make me think about things, and it's kind of exciting.
that means you're gonna change your mind.
No, that's what it means. That. I think. No, I'm going to text Andy Woods and say, "Hey, watch me and James on Friday."
Hey, listen, look, Andy has changed my mind a couple of times. Yeah, I think he's awesome.
I like what you said. I think it was really intriguing because you put it in a different context than the traditional pre-tribulation Bible prophecy teachings. You know, your context was different with how you say it's going to come together based on Europe, and I like that. That was very interesting. It makes I tell you this much: what you said makes a lot more sense to me than what I've been told over the years from former prophecy circles, how it's going to come out of Europe. That's never made sense to me before. That you have, it's just Europe's going to rule everything, and the way it's going to rule it, it doesn't make sense at all. Okay.
Yeah, so and I'm with you on all that. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think that it has to be. I think what you really have to do is what you have to do. You've got to go back and you've got to look at the pattern, the biblical pattern, right? When you look at the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation is a simple reiteration of everything we know and has been taught to us in the Old Testament. It reveals to us what we already know from the Old Testament. Well, if that's the case, then we have to understand how Rome operated. Understanding the European Union thing, as we call it, it's not like, you know what I mean when I say European Union thing now. Understanding that is going to come from a fundamental understanding of the way the Roman Empire worked back then. That's where you're going to get a majority of the insight.
Okay, I'll do this. I'll follow up. I'll look at more. And I'll expect you to look at some more things too. Okay,
come on, bro. You know I will.
Okay, I know you will. You're going to text Andy as soon as I hang up. I know you will. Okay, so I got a question for you. Since we talked about all these things, we only had a couple of minutes left. We actually probably went way long, but that's fine. We did go long. Wow. Okay. So Russia comes from the north with Iran and Turkey. Do you think we will see the formation of the 10 kingdoms, whichever they may be, before Ezekiel 38 or before the rapture? Or does it? I don't think it really matters. We could.
I think certainly before or around the same time as Ezekiel 38. I'm hard pressed to think that we're going to see it happen before the rapture. It may. We may begin to see the beginning signs of it, right? But for it to come into full fruition, I think we'll have to be raptured.
Yeah, I don't think.
Although theoretically, the existence of the Antichrist may still be there without him being revealed, which could preclude the necessity of the rapture to take place first. Yeah. But it's going to be around that same time, even if that is the case.
Yeah. So what I want to talk to you about next time, I want to talk to you about the timing again of the rapture, the 4 horsemen, and the beginning of the wrath, because I keep getting questions on the tribulation, where are we, and the wrath of God, because people conflate this, that they've heard pre-tribulation rapture people like you and I. They think, this is what they think, this is one of their accusations. You guys think the rapture takes place, the covenant of Daniel 9 takes place with the Antichrist the same day, and the same day God's wrath falls on the planet. We don't think that.
Not true.
We don't think that.
True. As a matter of fact, some of the judgments that actually take place will take place prior to the tribulation. People don't. They actually don't get that. The tribulation commences Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, right? The 70th week. Let me say this: the 70th week of Daniel commences at Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, right? But then when we start to get into what ends up happening at the 3.5 year mark and so on and so forth, look, the bottom line is the church could be raptured and we could be looking at potentially years before we see the commencement of the 70th week of Daniel.
Yeah. And do you believe any of the tribulation judgments could begin, not the Great Tribulation, not talking about that, could begin before the covenant is confirmed? Do you think that's possible?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
one of the technical judgments listed, right, is the introduction of the Antichrist. You can't have the commencement of Daniel chapter 9, or you can't have the commencement of the 70th week of Daniel without Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 taking place, and Daniel 9:27 can't take place until the Antichrist is revealed.
Yeah.
So that has to happen. That undoubtedly has to happen. And by the way, people don't get this. People think that God's judgment is when absolutely horrible things happen. I believe that the beginning of God's judgment upon a nation or a world is when God gives that nation or the world what they want. a great example of this. The beginning of God's judgment on the nation of Israel commenced the very moment they started demanding King Saul to be their king.
Want Saul to be their king. That's right.
So God said, you can have it. And that was his judgment.
That's it. Romans chapter 1. You can have it. I will turn you over. That's what you want. I'll turn you over.
That's exactly right.
And that is your judgment. Antichrist is in himself the worst judgment that's coming upon the planet, and people will be deceived. Okay.
Yep.
Hey, I hope people watched your live Facebook on Tuesday when we talked about UFOs at the end.
Yep.
Okay, I got to go. You got to go. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's been great today. Thank you very much. James, any final words for everybody?
No. Other than it was a good conversation.
It was great. I enjoyed that.
Pray for Tom that he changes his mind, everybody.
Yeah. There, half the people out there right now are going, they're siding with me. The other half are siding with you.
They're actually, what's going on is they're mad at both of us because we didn't come to a conclusion. This is like the fig tree thing.
Oh my gosh. Somebody emailed me about that again the other day. So angry over that fig tree. It's like, whatever.
Yeah, they're still mad. Yeah,
they get mad at you. They get mad at you because they say you're loud, and they get mad at me because they don't like my hair. So whatever.
Yeah. Someone told me the other day that I had no intelligence, and the only way I can compensate for my lack of intelligence is being loud. That was probably the first time I've ever heard that. That was pretty funny, actually.
That is funny. You're one of the smartest people I know. Of course, I only know 3 people. You really are. Anyways, thank you, James. I love you, brother.
I love you too, bro. Okay. This is a good conversation. We should have a few more of these. I bet a grip of people are going to watch this video.
Let's set up another one for next week. I want to do the timing of the judgments and the rapture. I got some questions to ask you because I'm working. Yeah, I'm looking at some things a little bit different now. Going some of the traditional ways of teaching, I don't have a lot of confidence in some of them anymore.
You darn straight on that.
Okay, good. So we're gonna have fun. That's where we'll go next week.
I'm with you
It'll be all fired up. Okay.
I'm with you there.
All right. God bless you. Love you, James.
Okay. Love you, bro.